Hello, friends. Hi and hello. My name's Emily. I'm with the New York State Brewers Association, and I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Heather McReynolds. Heather is a 15-year beer industry veteran. She's worn many hats during her time in the industry. She first fell in love with the beverage while bartending and managing a 400-bottle beer bar during grad school in Florida. After getting her start in brewing in Georgia, she moved to New York City 12 years ago to brew and then manage Six Point Brewery's pilot facility in Red Hook, Brooklyn. For 5 years, she worked with Guinness, focusing on beer education and social media marketing. And for the last 3.5 years, she's been the Northeast rep for Hopsteiner, a family-run company that have been hop merchants since 1845. Heather is also a phenomenal allied member of the New York State Brewers Association. Shameless plug that she didn't ask me to make, I'm making it. They do so much for us. They've sponsored a beer station I know that all of you have been enjoying. And also the incredible Hopsteiner Scholarship, where a woman or a non-binary person is awarded the chance to come and learn at this very conference. So without any further ado, Heather McReynolds.
Oh my gosh. You can hear me? This works. Okay. That's very cute. Thanks, Emily. So today we'll talk about hop contracting and purchasing, and I realize this is probably the least sexy component about hops. I'm gonna try to make it fun and digestible, and I'll be doing a little bit of trivia. That's my goal. Keep it fun as possible. So I will do, I'll be a very brief introduction on me since Emily did that, but I'll do an introduction on Hopsteiner. Brief overview. I know a couple of people were here from the Crosby talk just before this that went thoroughly into the status of the industry. I'm going to cover that for the people who weren't in there because I think it's really important to talk about contracting in the context of where the hop industry is right now. So we'll go over that briefly. Not as in-depth as Bo from Crosby did, but then we'll get into the hop contracting, purchasing, why to consider it, when it makes sense, what to look for, and then managing those. And I've got a QR code in there, and I'll do it again at the end. That'll be a link to a whole bunch of resources, these slides, crop reports. So either get that now or get it again. It's good stuff in there. I'm curious though, how many of you, show of hands, are currently buying spot hops but are thinking about contracting? Okay. How many of you are currently contracting? Sweet, yes. How many of you are currently contracting and there's things you wish you had done differently? It's okay. I'm hoping also that there'll be something for everybody in this talk, whatever stage you're at. Good things to think about, good questions to questions to ask your suppliers, things to think about, takeaways for everybody at every different stage of buying hops. So, we'll get into some introductions. That was one of my trivia questions first. So, where did Hopsteiner begin? Which country? Anybody who knows, shout it out. I have a cool fanny pack. Germany. Say, who hit that first? You said that first?
Yes.
So we started in Germany in 1845, which was a long time ago. We're a full-service, vertically integrated hop supplier, so that means that we do everything. We grow the hops, we process them, we pelletize them, we make them into extracts and oils, we do everything. Like I mentioned, we grow them, we also breed them as well. We work with breweries of all sizes, down from a person on a one-barrel system who's just looking for 5 pounds of hops at a time, all the way up to the big multinational lager breweries of the world. But then what's really fun about my job too is I can help brewers source hops from across the globe, which is pretty cool. Began in Germany, but our headquarters has been in New York City since sometime in the early 1900s. And then that's me. Emily covered a lot of it. But basically my job is education, like this, customer service, sales, outreach. I cover the whole Northeast, based in Brooklyn. I've been with Steiner now for 3.5 years, and because this is a company that's been around such a long time, we get people who work for us for a very long time, and I still think it's funny that I'm kind of technically the new guy. One of my sales team colleagues has been with Steiner for 20 years, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. But anyway. So let's briefly talk about what we harvested in 2024 and where that puts us. So, nutshell, if you sat in on Bo from Crosby's talk, this is probably what he talked about. Acreage peaked in 2021, and we are actively removing acreage to correct an oversupplied market. So we were roughly down 18% from 2023's acreage. There were some acreage cuts in 22 and 23, but we had really good yields, so that kind of wiped those acreage cuts out. Really big cuts to Citra Mosaic, Simcoe Cascade. That doesn't mean they're going away, it just means that we were way oversupplied on them, and so we're in a market correction. The hop industry is a pendulum. We're going to go from being oversupplied to hopefully not too undersupplied, and then back up again. It's pretty cyclical in that way. Hopefully that cyclical nature is smoothed out as best it can be, so we're not seeing super dramatic, but the oversupply is pretty dramatic right now. Hopefully with this correction to cut acreage, it won't be overly cut. So outside of the US, there was a good harvest in Germany this last year. I know you guys are probably using, European continental hops. Really great for lagers. But Germany is a special consideration, I think. They don't irrigate, so they're solely relying on rainfall, which is weird and I don't fully understand why. So crop 22 was really low as far as yields go, but then alpha and oil, mostly because there was a drought and it was just not enough rain. It's a bummer. So acreage in Germany is not growing. That's holding pretty steadily. But yeah, I mean, folks like you guys are looking to use these hops a little bit more. And then, the big question mark is tariffs. I don't know what to say on tariffs yet. I don't know what's going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we one of those situations. It's in for a minute and then back out again. Who knows? But that's always just a looming question mark, unfortunately. UK, New Zealand, Australia all had an average harvest too in 2024 as well. And we are right now harvesting crop 25, New Zealand, Australia hops. So those will be coming pretty soon this summer. So another trivia question: which country harvested the most acres of hops in 2024? Shout it out if you think you know. Germany! So, the last couple of years, U.S. has grown the most acres of hops, and I have to look back at when was the last time Germany was ahead of us, but it's been a minute. So yeah, Germany grew more acres of hops than us this year. And like I said, they're going to be holding steady. We're going to be decreasing acreage, so that number will come down a little bit more too. I think it's really cool to see Czechia up there a lot, since it's such a small country. They grow a lot of hops there. Don't get overly excited about hops from China, because basically they grow everything they need in China and they keep it there for snow and whatever macro lagers they're making. And then I think it's pretty cool to put it in perspective that every other hop growing country you can think of, right? South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, that all gets locked into the others category. So really not that much considering grown outside of Germany and the US. One more trivia question.
Germany.
No, not Germany. Which state grew the second most acres of hops in 2024?
Idaho.
Yeah!
That's cheating out of the last one.
Oh, you sat in on the last presentation? Ah, you were paying attention though, that's cool. So, Washington's number one. Number one by a long shot, right? 73% of America's hops are grown in Washington. Idaho was number two, 13%. Oregon, hanging tough, 12% of the hops. Oregon and Idaho sometimes go back and forth on the number of acres. But yeah, most of your American hops are going to be coming from Pacific Northwest. I think Idaho's considered Pacific Northwest. So that means every other state accounts for just 1.4% of all the hops that are grown. So yeah, Montana is a good bit. Michigan, we know is a good bit. And then obviously here in New York, I think we've got around 300 acres or so. But then all of your other small states, that's all a very, very small percentage of the market. So I think that puts it a little bit more in perspective of just how many acres are grown in Yakima, Washington. It's a pretty strong powerhouse. I always like to zoom into the Northeast because, for a couple reasons, but it's good to point out our sad little 415 acres of hops. I will point out too, this is 2023 numbers, so frankly it might have gone down a little since then. I don't have the 2024 numbers for what we grew, but I'm sure they are out there if I dig hard enough. So yeah, at least in 2023 we had 300 acres of hops in New York. Compare that to the thousands and thousands in Yakima. It's there. All that to say, it's really up to you guys. If you guys want hops from the Northeast, you really should be thinking about using them. I really fully believe wet hop beers are a great way to do this, right? You're not paying ridiculous shipping costs for wet hops to come out from the West Coast. You're getting them from some guy you could drive to and you could put them in your beer that day. I also really like it from a customer education point of view too, right? If you can connect your customers to hops that were grown locally, talk about local ingredients a little bit more. Yeah, it's also on the hop farmer a really great way for them to just get cash in their pocket, right? They're not processing these hops, they're not even drying these hops, right? So they're not storing them, they're not trying to sell them, a couple months later or something like that. It's just cash that's going in their pocket. So think about it. So then, looking at what we harvested over time, and then I've got the 2025 estimation of where we're going to be. So, see if my pointer works. Hey, it works. So, from 44,000 acres, we're going to see a cut of a couple dozen acres this year. But again, I kind of want to point out, increasing acreage over time, but we're basically kind of back to the level we were at 15 on the end, yeah. TBD, what happens in 2026? Maybe we will have corrected enough, maybe we'll need to come down some more, we'll see. But then obviously breaking out by state as well. So green is total Pacific Northwest, and then Washington in yellow, Oregon in gray, and then Idaho in green. Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember the hop shortage of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
How that messed up my contracting for many years after that.
Yeah.
How did the acres in 2013 this is great, it goes back to 2015, but I'm curious, before the start of these, was it a lot lower? Was it a big jump to get to the 2015 numbers? Or do you know?
I'd have to, not off the top of my head, I'd have to dig back in for those numbers. But, right, at the end of the day, the hop industry is supply demand. So I'm sure that if you were paying a lot of money, then there's a rush to get hops in the ground. And so it could have been one of those scenarios where it went from a very small amount to a very large amount. The other thing that's worth considering too is baby year hops, right? So if the first year you plant an acre of hops, you might not be able to use those hops, maybe they're true to type, maybe they're not. Because usually it takes at least a couple of years for, that hop year to reach full maturity. So yeah, I don't know, but I'd have that somewhere, I'm sure. So then I think it's always nice to point out too, right, we have the acreage numbers, but it's good to know how many pounds actually came out of the ground. And it's not going to look like this here necessarily, but as we come out with new hops, we're breeding new hops, one of the considerations for breeding hops, besides just does it smell and taste good, is can we get a lot of it out of the ground? So we're looking for yield to increase as well. So we're still actively looking at decreasing acreage so that we can correct this oversupply, but hopefully we're also getting to a place where each acre of land that we're growing is yielding a huge amount of hops, because that works out better for our systems as far as like, fertilizer use, land use, water use, those sorts of things too. So yield is always really important too, especially for pricing on a farmer. But looking at the amount of hops, actually to point that out, you're looking at, I'll go back real quick. Right, so until 2022, or that's about the same as 21. 21 and 22, we had acreage increasing. But then you'll see that, 2020, the yield was not as good. That bar is just not as high as 21 and 19. That's a bad yield, even though we had more acreage. So worth looking at for sure. That's how many pounds we pulled out of the ground in 2025, over the years, with an estimated number of harvesting 73 million pounds in 2025. But what did we pull out of the ground? These are the varieties that we're looking at. So what you've got here is acreage for 2023 and then acreage for 2024. I realize that still says estimated acreage. That should be out. That's the acreage that was grown. So notable reductions, right? I mentioned Citra Mosaic, Simcoe, Cascade, Willamette. When I say notable reductions, right, it's not like the sky is falling necessarily. There's still, if you look at the numbers, there's still a lot of Citra in the ground, still a lot of CTZ, still a lot of the Mosaic. What you do want to keep an eye out on, especially if there's particular hops you really love or really rely on, is when it gets to smaller amounts or like really drastic cuts. Like Willamette is worth pointing out. Willamette is right here, right? So it only started with about 1,000 acres and then it lost 50% of its acreage. So there's not a lot of Willamette on the market right now, and TBD on what that acreage looks like for Willamette this year or in the future. So, that's a little bit of an indicator if that's a hop that you rely on or use a lot. You need to pay attention to that. And then especially too on the other end, right, these hops with, 2-digit acreage numbers, even if you're looking at a hop that lost, 5 acres, 10 acres, okay, but it started with such a small amount to begin with. Those are the hops that if we're not seeing interest from brewers, could get cut, especially if it's only down to, a couple of farmers that are growing it and they make the decision to plant something else instead. So between 23 and 24, also worth pointing out, there were some increases as well. So Helios, actually a hop from Hopsteiner, it's a bittering hop. So alpha's always good to plant in the ground. That's pretty steady as far as what a farmer can get for it. So that increased. Palisade increased for some reason. Cluster, another weird one. And then Delta is, in my mind, a little bit of a noble American hop. So I can kind of see why that increased. But then also worth pointing out too, Centennial, pretty stable. And it has been, I think, for the last couple of years. So that's great. We found our stride with that one. We finally got the right amount in the ground that the brewers are using. Cool. US saws, US Hallertau. I'm thinking, I'm hypothesizing that, that's because people are brewing lagers and they're willing to use US grown varieties of these European noble hops. So, moving on to the meat and potatoes of this talk, contracting and purchasing. So, why do you want to consider it? There's a lot of reasons, basically. I think security of supply is a big one. Like we kind of talked about with that varietal list, even though we're currently oversupplied, there's still some varieties that are in really tight supply demand. Experimental varieties, that's a good example, right? If there's somebody coming out with an experimental that you really like, obviously it's a huge indicator to that grower supplier that you want more of it if you contract it. But also too, if the opposite side of it, they're not seeing any contracting, then they're probably not going to put it in the ground. And maybe that's an indicator to cut that hop entirely. European noble hops for the reasons I mentioned before, right? Like it's not always easy growing hops in Germany. Those are still in tight supply demand, but also too, when you're importing hops without a contract, you don't know what kind of buyer, you don't know if you're gonna have a buyer for those hops. So you're talking about the expense of shipping over hops, getting them through customs, and then a big question mark of who might be buying these hops. So not a lot of them are brought over for the spot market. And then low yielding hops, right? If a plant is hard to grow or is not giving a farmer the yield that they want, they're not going to be as inclined to grow it. So that can lead to a tight supply for those hops. Volatility in the crop production obviously can affect availability. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, the forward contracting is a big indicator, obviously, to growers that somebody's looking for this. But another reason you might want to think about contracting, price stability, right? So especially if you're buying spot and you're getting it from different people on the billing exchange or wherever else you might be getting it, you know, you could be paying one price one day and another price 2 months from now. Contracts are obviously going to smooth out those price things. The finance sides of your operations probably really like knowing how much they're going to be paying for hops over a year. So the financial planning aspect is really important too. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, that signaling of the industry of, hey, these are hops I want. Zooming out, right, the majority of the hops that are grown are used by brewers. It's not like we have other people that are using these, right? So if we're not getting an indicator from brewers that this is a variety they want, then it's less likely to be in the ground. Like I mentioned too, those niche varieties, those experimentals, they might not be planted if there's contracts in place. US Magnum, US Golding, I didn't even realize it, but I think they've stopped being grown. I know I had a brewer who was asking about them and they're not available anymore. Is what it is. So one of the other important aspects too is the lot stability, right? Like if you can select, that's great. But even that consistency of having that same lot is super important too, obviously. You're going to be getting the same thing every time when you have a contract. So when does it make sense? And I do think regardless of how much beer you might be making, you know, these are good questions to ask yourself. Is there a hop you're using in multiple beers? So if one of those beers stops being brewed for whatever reason, you know, can you use it other places? That might be a good thing to consider contracting that hop. Is it important to the brewery? You know, or is it, you know, one hop that you just really have a big crush on and love? Is it featured in the beer or desired for some other reason? Is it, or maybe the opposite side of that, like it's a niche variety that's not widely grown and you want to make sure that you're still getting it. Would you consider substituting it? If you're saying, no, I don't want to substitute this, that's more of an indicator that you might want to. You know, niche and new hops can have high price fluctuations. So if you're locking in a contract, you know, that's great for smoothing out those price fluctuations. Can you use the minimum contract amount in a year or take in the remainder of them, right? I know that storage and interest fees are tacked on, but I promise you, like, I don't want you to have to pay those. So I want you to at least be able to use that contract amount before the storage and interest fees start, or be able to ship them in so you're avoiding those. At Steiner, our contract minimum is 5 cartons per variety per year. You know, if you don't anticipate using that amount, do you have, you know, the upfront cash in the storage space so that you can bring those in and avoid the storage and interest fees? Because, again, worth reiterating, like, hops don't expire after a year. You got 5 or 6 years. I understand if it's in a cold storage room, you're going to want to use it as sooner than possible, but, you know, they don't go bad. Is it really important for you to have consistent quality, consistent lot, right? If you're receiving the same lot, that's flavor aroma stability, that's alpha stability, you know, ease of use on brew day. I feel like this doesn't happen quite as much anymore, but I still am so nervous about those old lupulin exchange days where I heard of like people sticking stickers of different hops on the wrong side of the box and sending the wrong stuff to people. And yeah, want to, make sure when you're buying on spot that you're looking at where those hops are being stored, right? If somebody's got those hops stored, either by us in Yakima or by CH in Yakima, then like it was pelletized and it just went back into cold storage. If it was shipped out to another brewery, then, how was it shipped? How was it taken care of? How was it stored? Obviously with contracting, you don't have to worry too much more about that, but, look at selection minimums too. So with Hopsteiner, you can select US hops in Yakima for that 220 pound minimum. That's pretty sweet. A lot of people like that. When do you maybe need to reconsider contracting? So the opposite end of this, like when does it not make sense? If you're a new brewery, I want you to be able to plan your hop needs for like at least a year out before contracting. I hope you guys know what WAG means, wild ass guess. Don't make a wild ass guess on forecasting the amount of hops you might need. It's tricky to change it. You really can't change it. We can modify it, but you can't change it. You should also probably try to get an idea of what beers your customers like before you lock in hops, right? Like, I feel like I've talked to plenty of brewers who said, man, I got this awesome recipe for a Kolsch. And then a year later, they're like, nah, nobody's drinking my Kolsch. Everybody's drinking my IPA. We want people to drink things. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to drink them. When to also reconsider contracting, maybe you're flexible on hop varieties. Maybe you're not married to any specific ones. You can use substitutes, right? There are plenty of hops that substitute well for other hops. And if you're one of those brewers that's pretty cool with that, then, maybe you don't need a contract. Maybe you're also just doing a ton of one-offs, or you're just doing small batches, right? You might not even want to be tied into a contract. You might want that flexibility of just getting whatever is out there, whatever is cool. So if you do think you want to consider contracting, here's some of the things that you probably want to think about. So forecasting, super, super important, right? You need to give me a number of like what amount you think you might want to need. That starts the conversation. If you could forecast 1 year out, great. That's the minimum, obviously. If you feel confident and you are someone who does, want the security of knowing where your hops are going to be in 2 or 3 years, then, you can think about forecasting out 2 or 3 years. That's probably also variety dependent too. I like to talk about a stepped contract structure, right? So brew year 0, that would be the current year we're in. You probably want to contract all or most all of what you're looking to use that year. But then also talk with me especially like right now, right? We're in an oversupplied market. What does the availability for that hop look like if I do need more this year? And then, year 1 would be the next brew year out. You're looking at 75%. You want to contract 75% of what you're looking for. Year 2, you're looking at 50%. We like that structure because then we're also facilitating conversation, right? So I want to check in with you and, do we need to up the amount? Do we need to try to do some modifications? Your needs might change. That lets us communicate and be flexible. You also want to make a note of when these hops will be available, right? So American hops, you're looking at December, January, February after harvest. But then European hops, since they literally have to be brought over on a boat, you could be as late as June before you come in. So you're looking at different forecasting schedules for when you're going to be using those hops in the first place. Maybe consideration could be looking at current year contracting for prior year hops. So this is kind of a unique situation we're in now. Again, with an oversupply, they're readily available, right? They're there. They're waiting for us in Yakima or Oregon. They can be sampled ahead of time. I'm sure there's people that would give you pretty good deals on those, especially too if there was a variety that you used that you really loved the crop year, right? You could probably get more of that They're still out there. You might not be able to do that 5 years in the future if we're looking at reducing acreage and there's less volume in general, but that could be something that you could look at now. And I'm sure myself and other suppliers would be happy to have that conversation with you. Consider the contract timing of when you're having these conversations. So it's a good idea to look at contracting the fourth quarter, first and second quarters for Northern Hemisphere hops. When you get into the third quarter, so July, August, September, that's when the hops are actively growing. Pricing is super, super volatile, so that pricing is reacting to, oh man, there was a hailstorm in Yakima, last week, and now we don't know about this variety, right? It makes it trickier to try to nail down what that pricing looks like. And it's a much easier conversation to look at everything all together if you're looking at contracting conversations in fourth quarter and the first and second quarters. Other things to consider. Ask lots of questions. Please ask lots of questions. Please read the fine print. So what are the storage and interest fees? When do they start? I want you to know when these fees are going to start kicking in, because again, I don't want you to pay them. What are the shipping terms? Where are they shipping from? Are you going to be required to remove any inventory after a certain period of time? I know we don't do that, but maybe some other suppliers do. When are you going to be invoiced? If you are going to be invoiced, do you need to prepay any money upon signing? I know some suppliers might ask for money up front. I don't, but other people might. What flexibility is there for variety swaps if you need them? That's a good conversation to have up front in case something happens with, a brand you're brewing or a variety you're using. Just understand everything that's going into this contract and how you're going to be buying these hops before you sign it. And then, get quotes from multiple suppliers. Even just going over that first part, right? There's terms and conditions between suppliers can be different. And, I want to make sure that when you're looking at different offers, you're looking at apples to apples offers so that you're not looking at one that's wildly different from the other. But pricing can vary by more sometimes from supplier to supplier, and some suppliers' terms might be more flexible and might suit you and your business model or your finances a little bit better. Is there room to move on price? It's not always a no. It might be, depending on the variety, but it might not always. There might be room to move on price. But then again, is price the most important thing to you? Right? When you're thinking about those storage and interest fees, the shipping terms, is there something that works out better for you and you're willing to pay, 5 cents more per pound or something? When you're talking to multiple suppliers, how do you like their ordering processes? How do you order? How would you order? Who are you going to talk to when you order? What does that look like? Does it work for you? Can it be changed if you need to? Can it work for you to fit better for you? And then, think about your relationship with that supplier, because the way I see it, a contract is a business partnership, right? You sign a contract with me, I have a very vested interest in your business to make sure that you're doing well and succeeding, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that's happening. So then, let's say you signed a contract. How are you going to manage them? Well, first you're going to order your hops. Don't forget that you signed contracts, please. Write that down somewhere. Put that in a spreadsheet. I don't know what works best for you, but please don't sign a contract and then forget, because it's not like it goes away if you forgot about it. It's still there. Somebody's going to grow those hops for you. Keep track of your forecasts, right? We need to be talking as soon as possible, are you going to need more hops? Is something taken off? Or opposite end, are we in an over-contracted situation? Communication is so big here, right? If it's moving into a situation where you're accidentally over-contracted, I need to know, your supplier needs to know as soon as possible. The better, the quicker we can address it, the quicker and less painful it'll be. But then too, communicate with your brewery stakeholders, right? I've heard issues of people going man, sales and marketing just cut that brand of that IPA and like didn't consult me, and now I have this contract I can't use. It's like, would them knowing that you had a contract for it, like maybe change that a different direction? I don't know, but you know, make sure that you're communicating with the rest of your team like, cool, yep, we've got this raw ingredient for this beer now, so we're a little bit locked in, unless you find another situation where you can use that hop. But yeah, so let's say you're in an instance where you're a little overcontracted. We need to modify them. Again, like I mentioned, have that conversation up front. What does it look like if you ask your supplier, your potential supplier, what does it look like if I need to modify my contracts or make adjustments? It's not a cancellation, it's a modification. So you're still doing business with that supplier, you're still working with them, you're just adjusting either, probably the variety. So at least at Hopsteiner, we do a same year variety swap, or some instances we can push out to future crop year a certain volume, or a combination of both. So let's say, for example, you had contracted 5 cartons of Cascade and you used 4 cartons, and then something happened, you no longer needed it. What I'm going to say is, what other variety can you use? What can you use 44 pounds of? Centennial? Cool, great. We're just going to magically make that in a Centennial now. Straightforward, but it can be a little bit tricky, and everybody might do it a little bit differently. So have those conversations up front. So you also, as you need to manage your hop contracts, you also need to manage your supplier relationships. And yes, it's in caps right here, because ordering your hops and paying for them is the best thing to do to keep your relationship with your supplier happy. And it's very important. Don't forget you contracted those hops. Order them, please. Pay for them, please. It's much appreciated. I've said it a bunch of times already. Communication, extremely important. Maybe you schedule regular meetings to check in. I know I do that with brewers with really, really big contracts, but you know, I'm happy to do that with people who have smaller contracts as well. That holds us both accountable, right? If things are going great, it's great. Maybe it doesn't even need to be a conversation. I just check in, cool, great. Or that's an instance where you're going to look at your contracts and you're going to look at how you've been pulling them in, and maybe you're going to say, oh wait, this could be an issue. Have those meetings. I'm happy to have those meetings with people. I'm happy to, that if you're on top of it, that makes me so happy. And like I mentioned before, if you're signing a contract with me, I have a vested interest in you. I'm your cheerleader, I'm your fan. I'm gonna go drink all your beer when I see it on tap. I wanna help you succeed, because ultimately, going back to the first bullet, I want you to order your hops and pay for them. And if you're not succeeding, then you can't pay for your hops. It's that simple. Not to say I don't love spot hop buyers too. I know this has been mostly about contracting, but I love and appreciate everybody who's buying spot hops from me as well. I also like to point out the fact that, like, when you sign a contract, your rep is who is negotiating internally on your behalf. So that communication is even more important, right? You're communicating, you know, if you're hitting your forecasting goals that you intended, if you're shipping as much as you thought you were, you're still using that hop as much as you thought you were, your rep is also going to be the person that's going to take that feedback of, hey, this is what I need now, to their team internally to get you whatever changes you might need or what you might need in the future. So your rep is working for you inside that supplier. I do think it's really important that you work with multiple suppliers. If a harvest issue happens, if a weather issue happens, if you're getting all your hops from one supplier, you know, God forbid they can't fulfill your whole contract. You don't want to be an issue where you're scrambling to get the hops that you're looking for. I do think too, you're probably spending more money than necessary on contracts if you're only working with one supplier. With limited varieties, and we're looking at harvest decreases in the future, suppliers are going to get selective. And if somebody needs a hop that is a little harder to find, I'm probably going to sell it to somebody that I'm doing business with already, sad to say. So, to sum it up, did I say communication already? Communication. Key, right? With your supplier, with me, but also your team. Make sure your team is aware. Like, you're locked into a contract. You got it for this hop. You know, you're going to keep making this brand. Please review them frequently. Like I said too, it's easier and it's less painful to adjust earlier than later. So check in on them. Maybe you make yourself a note, Google Calendar note, something to, you know, once a month, once every other month, check in. Make sure you're using them as much as you said you were. Use your suppliers as a resource, right? This is my job. I used to be a brewer. I used to think about all the things that went on in a brewery, and I used to try to stay on top of all the things that went in the brewery, but now I just do this, and I love just focusing on hops. Hop suppliers, use them as a resource. Your multipliers, they're the subject matter experts for your raw ingredients. Use them as a resource. Be aware of the general status of the industry, right? You should have an idea that we're oversupplied right now. You should have working knowledge that, we're cutting acreage. You don't have to stay into the nitty gritty as much as I do. That's kind of my job. But going into a conversation, especially a contracting conversation, or I guess heck, even a purchasing conversation of, spot hops, have an idea where that variety is in the market. Keep an eye on that acreage. Again, the status of the industry, keep an eye on that acreage if you're using those niche hops. If you're contracting, if you're not contracting. If it's dwindling, like maybe you need to consider some substitutes for those niche hops. And then a contract is a tool to buy hops, but it's also a partnership. I can't underscore that enough, right? We're doing business together, and I want to make sure you succeed. So, that being said, awesome resources, and then a link to all the presentation notes, and a link to these resources too, so it's all in there. But, any questions? Yeah, hi.
Hello. I'm not sure if you would know the answer to this because we live in unprecedented economic times, but if I were to sign a contract for say 3 years for a German noble hop, and then some stable genius puts a tariff on Germany, does your company pay that, or does that get passed through my contract?
That's where you're going to want to read the fine print, and that could be another situation where every supplier might be different. But I think with Steiner, that's going to get passed on to you. I don't know if another supplier might do it differently, and I'm sure everybody's kind of looking at that right now to double check, but unfortunately, I think it's kind of, again, it worded into the contract that, any sort of increases in that way would be on the buyer.
Sure, Germany doesn't pay it.
Tariffs. I hate that word. Anybody else? Questions? Concerns? Thoughts? Compliments? Cool. Okay, well, I'll be around. I got a booth upstairs. I also got beer if you want to drink beer with me. Thank you.